Over the last year and a half, I've been getting up to speed on Kubernetes, and I wanted to share with you some of the topics that I investigated so that as you take your deep dive into the technology, you can get up to speed on things faster than I was able to. Okay, so here's the basic strategy that I am recommending that you use as you begin your deep dive. To initially look into kubectl, deploy something out like WordPress. We're going to demo this later. And then after doing everything manually and starting to see the repetitive nature of the deployments, switch up over to Helm and do a Helm deployment also of WordPress and see how much simpler that is to let somebody else manage a lot of those pieces. And then we're going to use Argo CD, which is the idea of GitOps to deploy those Helm charts that we did in the previous step. And of course, in order to use Argo CD, you have to first deploy out Argo CD. But before we get to that, okay, so this video is for self-starters, people who are driven to investigate and learn things on their own. And such people might not even want a list, but I'm throwing it out there anyways, in case these are things that might capture your interest. They certainly captured my interest, and they drove me to continue to look into Kubernetes and stayed absolutely fascinated with the technology. And I think you may also find them interesting as can be. So without going into too much information, because I think you're the kind of person who might just start Googling these and taking a look yourself. Cert Manager, it generates the certificates automatically. So when we deploy that WordPress site, how do we get the certificates? There's a way to automate that within Kubernetes. What about registering the IP address for the URL that we're using to access that WordPress site? That was a manual process before, but in Kubernetes, it's automatic. FluentBit for logging everything in the Kubernetes cluster, all the applications running, and Kubernetes itself to a log aggregator. Of course, you'll need a log aggregator to log to, right? That's not even on the list. We'll have to look into that later. And service mesh. So at some point you're going to say, well, I'm running this WordPress site. What if somebody hacks into it? Can they hack into the rest of my cluster? The answer is no, if you've set a service mesh up correctly, right? And I've listed out a couple here so you can look into those. I've heard Linkerd is the thing you set up in like 5 minutes, so it's working while you spend the next 8 hours looking into Istio. I don't want to take anything away from Istio. I've talked with some of the creators of Istio, and that product has everything you could ever hope for. Oh, it's it's do I say it's a work of art? It's got it all. But the thing is, they are rewriting their product and releasing something else, as I understand it, called Istio Ambient. And I think once that's released, you're going to probably want to move from Linkerd over to Istio Ambient. At least I'm recommending you investigate both of them, right? Because I think they both have their own niche, and it's something that would be valuable to know, right? All these things that I'm listing off here, if you went into an interview and you already knew these, they're going to see that you have already done a lot of due diligence on your own. Prometheus and Grafana, lots of YouTube videos out there, right? Prometheus is gathering up the metrics. By default, it's just gathering up everything about that cluster that you're running it on. But individual apps like WordPress can generate metrics too. And Prometheus will gather those up. And then you use Grafana to look at the metrics. And that's a whole nother topic in itself. I'll probably make videos on each of these individual things. vCluster, virtual clusters. So you could have one master cluster that's, using up all your resources, and you can spin up a virtual cluster within them, like a non-production cluster and production cluster. Maybe you don't want to have multiple real clusters. Maybe you just want to have one cluster and use virtual clusters within them. I do, and it's amazing. It's just amazing what it does. It lets you connect to those virtual clusters like they're full-on clusters. But yeah, as far as something to look into and explore, I'm adding it to the list. And you got to do secret management at some point. Probably not right now when you're looking at this video, month down the road. But wouldn't it be cool to have passwords that rotate, every few months automatically? External secrets is a perfect solution. There's several other solutions out there. You'll hear about sealed secrets and whatnot. It's just a starting point, right? And then I'm putting Argo CD over there. I tell you, when it came to me looking into Kubernetes, if Argo CD and get opposite self didn't exist, I don't know if I would be nearly as obsessed as I am. So you don't have to go there right away. But, you know, as you're exploring these things, as you're setting these up, you can see how these are kind of infrastructure, right? These are things that are just going to run every time you set up a cluster, you're going to install these in each cluster, right? Just kind of foundational things. And you can use Argo CD to manage those in each of the clusters, besides the apps that you're actually going to be running within those clusters. And once you get to that point where you start up a new cluster using some technology like Cluster API, and then you register it in Argo CD, and it automatically installs the certificates and the external DNS and all that, and it starts logging everything it needs to log. You guys, it's amazing, and I hope you have a similar experience to what I have. Um, let's continue on. Don't feel overwhelmed. If you're the kind of person who is a self-starter and driven to learn these technologies, I don't need to teach you this. You already probably know this. Maybe this is a point I can mention. Um, a book called Mastery by George Leonard is something that helped me out as far, it describes different ways of learning, right? And different styles. And if you can identify your style, in mine, he calls it a hacker style, that I can learn a bunch of stuff really fast, and then you kind of max out and you recognize that point. And instead of trying to learn more, which could be frustrating, right? Because in that style, you can't really learn anymore. You got to kind of take it easy. Instead, you just take it easy for a little bit and you rest up, build the energy back up, and then you can do it again, do another incredible deep dive. So once you know your strategy, you can learn without any frustration and you can kind of maximize the result. So I recommend that book if that's something of interest. But just in general, right? I've got the picture here. The ants, they build it one grain at a time, right? And that's what we're doing learning Kubernetes. You just look into things as you have time and you're interested in them, and then switch to something else if it's lost your interest, and start looking into something else. And as you gain experience, maybe when you go back, it will be not nearly as complicated. You'll think, why was this even a struggle for me? This was easy, and then you just install it right away, right? So just have fun with it, right? This is an amazing technology. You'll see why people who are using the technology among themselves, they know it's pretty much going to replace the kind of infrastructure that we have these days. I like to call it like BK and AK, before Kubernetes, after Kubernetes. And I've been taking a lot of lessons learned from the Kubernetes world back to the BK world. But just have fun, right? It's fun technology. So after you get all those infrastructure things in there, which I'm recommending, are a great learning process. You're going to learn a ton by struggling to get those to work, right? And breaking them and fixing them and just wiping them out and reinstalling them. You might want something a little more simple, right? So these are locations where you can find about projects that exist that are Kubernetes related. And Bitnami, we're going to use a Helm chart for WordPress from there. There's lots of other Helm charts there, right? Several of those other items that I listed as infrastructure and whatnot, they're there at the Bitnami site, right? It's associated with VMware. I've used it quite a bit, and you'll see as you use these things that there's a kind of personality of the company, of the people who maintain lots of charts, and the kind of effect, right, of what the charts like. So just to give another example, here's True Charts. And before I talk about that too much, there was another project called Kate's at Home, which was awesome. The staff, the people were passionate, and what they did was, it was really an expression of open source and a successful project. It was so cool. And it's deprecated now. I don't know, if you don't get money with open source, sometimes that happens. But a lot of their efforts have been moved over to True Charts. So not everything, they had their own stuff, but there's been a merge there. So it's kind of cool. We didn't lose everything that the Kate's at Home guys did. But True Charts, they're focused on this network area storage TrueNAS product. And at the time of this video, they're saying, okay, these charts are meant to work within that environment, but they are Helm charts, and you can use them if you want. So, And they said in a few months they're going to make some changes, maybe update the Helm charts so that they work not just with their product, but in general as Helm charts. But we'll see. But I'm putting it out there because there's a lot of projects there. You can just like look at the Helm charts that they got and go, okay, these are some things. Maybe I should try this one out just to experiment, right? And then try something else so you can gain experience working with things in the Kubernetes environment. And True Charts and the Kate's at Home project, they both had something like a common library associated with their Helm charts, right? So say there's like 50 applications and they have Helm charts for each one, so they're easy to deploy into your environment. In the same way, for every application, if you wanted to say add storage, right, you're going to define it in one particular way. And then that technique is going to work in all the applications, which as you progress, you're going to see that that's incredibly cool, right? If you want to add an ingress so that you can define the URL to access your application, you define it in the exact same way for, all applications, all 50 or however many, apps that they have set up and ready to go. And one thing that I found, which was kind of amazing, you can configure any app to go through a VPN. They have that like in a standardized way, which is fascinating, right? So no matter what the application is, if you wanted it to go through a VPN, you can, right? And I mean, that's just kind of amazing. And like, how on earth is it doing? So as you're watching this video, right? This is made for people who are kind of in the beginning, right? This is something. Don't look into this just yet, right? Just take your time. I don't want to overwhelm you, but come back to this video later on and just watch it again and see if there might be a few more things that kind of like nudge you forward. Like here's something else you can look into to look into how this thing is able to route pods through a VPN is totally cool, right? Like, how did they do that in like a common library? So it's so easy to route any of your applications through it. I I I was just kind of blown away by that, and it's set up for like WireGuard or OpenVPN or and it it's fascinating, something to look into. So I just wanted to point that one thing out. Continuing on, CNCF, if you don't know about that yet, go to that website right now. You're going to see projects with an incubation product, right? Or they go first through incubation, right? And then they graduate eventually. There's a lot of oversight. There's a lot of open source contributions happening, right? And I just listed a couple up there because you're going to probably want an on-site container repo like Docker IO. They have Harbor. I'm recommending that one just to get started, get that one in place, and you can cache the images that you pull from Docker IO local and then use them there because Docker IO has a limit. Well, you'll get to that at some point probably. If you can't pull an image at some point, that's what's going on. And I'm trying to set you up for success here. Once that happens, you need to just chill out for a little bit, allow those timeouts to do their thing, get Harbor in place, use it as a proxy. And then cluster API, man, I wish I knew about that sooner than later. That lets you just spin up a cluster. So initially, people use something like Minikube or Rancher, and well, those can be convenient, right? They might have an add-on to install the Kubernetes dashboard or whatnot. But I recommend just getting right to it, like installing actual Kubernetes, right? And I've created a couple other videos to do like a single node cluster, do it pretty quick, or multi-node cluster, right? Whatever you need. And then it's just like a raw Kubernetes cluster full of potential. You can install those other support products. But if you want to start out with Minikube, a lot of people do, you can do that, or Rancher, or there's a few things out there, whatever you want to do, right? And then eventually at some point, you're going to see this cluster API. It lets you define the cluster you want as YAML. And then we're going to get to GitOps eventually with Argo CD. You can take that YAML, put it into a Git repo. Argo CD is going to see it, and it's going to deploy a cluster into your environment based on that YAML. And then later you can modify the YAML, add another worker node or something, or change the resources that are defined. Git Argo CD is going to see the change. It's going to modify that cluster in your environment. It's going to be cool. I think it's cool. I think it's amazing. Not every product supports it, right? But like VMware supports it. So if you're using VMware, you can use Cluster API to deploy clusters in there. But I digress. Continuing on. I hope you have as much fun with this as I am. I'm trying to generate the feeling and excitement of what it's like to get into Kubernetes, but I don't want to overwhelm you, right? Just take your time. If you have media, this could be something that captures your attention just to make it fun to onboard applications into your environment. There's this ARR series of products, and they're all kind of similar. So it could be a good experience just to, I don't know, get some additional things deployed out in your environment. Several people have these sorts of applications in their home environment to work with their media library. And then moving on to storage. So this is going to be a big deal, right? So, okay, I'm going to save you some time here. So eventually, as you do more deployments into your environment, you're going to find that some applications want to have read write many. Okay, so like Taiga, for example. Well, without going into too many specifics, the thing is, what I want to share with you is if you have an application running like WordPress and you upgrade that application, like with a new image version, Kubernetes can start up that new version, wait for the new one to be ready, and then take the old one down. But if that pod is trying to use storage, that new version, it can't start up until the old one frees up the storage, right? And if it's using it, you can't access it from the new pod if it's configured with read write once. And a lot of stuff you're going to, as you get started, you're going to use this read write once. But if you configure it instead as read write many, then when you start the second one up, it also has access, and the second it's ready, it can shut down the first one. And that's how you get your zero downtime, which is cool as can be. If you're not using read write many, you can't have zero downtime. You're going to start up the new one, and then you're going to delete the old pod, and there's going to be a gap there while it takes control of the PVC and then comes back only a few seconds. So it doesn't matter in your home lab environment. But this is a goal, right? And what I'm presenting with you are goals to work towards, just to keep the motivation going, right? To keep it fun. And most people, if you see under network there, I think start with like NFS and CIFS, right? So you're going to CIFS being like a Windows share. I think that's what you're going to try to configure first. Go for it. It's going to work great. And NFS, it's going to work great to a point, right? I think you need to have these experiences. Don't stop yourself. Go ahead and configure those things and use them if you want. But as far as read write, execute, read write once, you might run into something. There's a couple programs that I consistently had problems with that use SQLite, Plex, and Nextcloud. And so if you want to use either of those, I would recommend using them just so you can watch SQLite become corrupted. And people will tell you, no, NFS, use NFS, it'll work with read write many. I don't think they've really pushed their systems to the limit, or they have something underlying in their NFS provider that's exceptional. In my experience, I tried every configuration I came across and I asked people for help, and no one could give me a configuration for an NFS server that would work. I don't want to drill down on this too much, but I'm thinking NFS and CIFS, try them out. But just know that before you experience way too much frustration, that they're not perfect, right? And then the next thing you're going to try out after you kind of move away from those and find that they're not perfect, you're going to have some sort of program that pushes them to the limit. You're going to try Longhorn. That's a local program there that will use hard drive that's on the worker nodes of the cluster, and it seems to be cool. And they say, hey, it works with read write read write many. But I'm going to say, don't believe it. It's a beta feature, right? And they're using NFS. So if you push that thing to the limit, I'm not guaranteeing that it's working. And I used Longhorn, and I ended up using a lot of taints and tolerances to redirect pods to only use the first worker node and then local storage on the worker node so that I could use read write once and only on that first worker node. And that got me by for months, but that's not read write many. Read write many is a goal here. I ended up buying a TrueNAS server. So it's open source, so really you just need a server, and then you can use that as an open source product on that server and have TrueNAS core. I did end up purchasing a TrueNAS server because it worked for me, and it uses iSCSI, and it can also do like a CIFS share. And I used iSCSI for my PVCs. But you know what? They are not read write executable. I mean, People may claim this, but no, it didn't work. I did not get read write executable until I used Ceph. So I am not recommending you use Ceph right off the bat because I had to know, I had to learn quite a bit before I could use it. In fact, I came across Ceph and I tried to install it and I tried to understand it, and it didn't make any sense to me, and I was completely overwhelmed. And I walked away. I'm like, I don't even really know what that thing was. But then a few months later, I go back and revisit it, and I don't know why I had that impression because it was so simple and I was able to deploy it out. And I think the thing is, I didn't have the vocabulary yet to understand what they were doing because I was too new. But once I had the vocabulary after I'd used Kubernetes for a while, I could read the documentation and there was nothing to it, right? And it's a product that's been around a while and it's solid. And once I installed that, I tested out some, Nextcloud and Plex, and I pushed them to their limits and they worked. And read write executable became, or read write many became available to me. And it changed a lot, right? I no longer needed the taints and tolerances. I no longer needed the local storage. I could do everything with the network storage, the PVCs, and now I had zero downtime. And it makes sense. It took like a year of taking down my clusters, redeploying, and trying out new tools and whatnot. But now, I've got a pretty solid system. Everything's rewrite executable. It's pretty much zero downtime for everything. So storage makes a difference. You're going to have some things to learn there. And I couldn't recommend Ceph any higher. But it's not the only solution. I've talked with other people who use Synology. I'll just throw that one out, and they say rewrite executable works just fine. And they say when I use NFS, rewrite executable works just fine with NFS. So I don't know, right? So Ceph offers like NFS on top of their Ceph file system, and I wonder maybe that NFS share would be read write executable. Maybe it makes a difference what's underneath. I don't know. But I just wanted to share this with you, perhaps get you up to speed faster. Mainly, I think you should still explore these other options in FS SIFs, set them up yourself, just using what you got, trying out Longhorn, finding it's not perfect, and looking into other things. I want you to have those experiences. But I don't want you to be too frustrated when you start to see that things aren't working because they promise read write executable and everybody says it's going to work. Just use iSCSI for your SQLite server. That'll work perfectly. No, it won't. Just use NFS. It's going to work fine. That works great with Plex. No, don't believe it. Ceph is so cool. It's as amazing as Kubernetes, Ceph, Argo CD. This is mind-blowing technology when you're putting these three things together. Once you get to GitOps, you're going to be set. All right, so let's go ahead and do that demo. I decided to do the demo in another video. You don't need a demo to get started, right? You're a self-starter. Good luck.